Yes, so let's get straight into it. So today I'm going to debut as the Lotus Eaters fashion reporter, hence the denim. Let's have a look at what nonsense the American left has been up to this week. So there's a popular type of protest attire for LARPers who want something a little bit more colourful than black bloc out there. If we go to this one, so in 2017, the New York Times is reporting on this, and we have a Handmaid's Tale of protest, if we scroll down, in state capitals and elsewhere. Protesters are wearing this from which is the costume from the Netflix the Hulu adaptation of The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Women dressed as handmaids demonstrated against funding cuts to Planned Parenthood outside the national capital in Washington on Tuesday. Well, that's very interesting. So they're protesting at the Capitol there.
But also just the idea that if we can't abort babies, we're basically sex slaves, so we might as well dress up as it, which is the reason for the costumes, presumably. I never read the books, I would say.
But I love the way they phrased this, because if we scroll down a little more, silent heads bowed, the activists in crimson robes and white bonnets have been appearing at demonstrations against gender discrimination and the infringement of reproductive and civil rights. Some have drawn comparisons between the show The Handmaid's Tale and the current political climate. In Vanity Fair, one critic explored whether it was an allegory for the Trump era. You know, years and years before the Trump era. Anyway, in The New Yorker, a reviewer discussed its grotesque timeliness. Another at the same publication said that we already live, if you scroll up, John, there we go, we already live in the reproductive dystopia the show presents. Wow, that's bold, isn't it? I'm just bringing us back to 2017 to point out that these guys have been out there for a long time. But the New York Times is very much in favour, I think, of this. They talk about it as a symbol of a repressive patriarchy and so on. They can be handmade, repurposed, or ordered online. You can imagine how, if you're that way inclined, you're reading this like, oh, I could make my own, or I could repurpose some, I could order some online. Oh, a symbol of women's solidarity. That's amazing.
Weird kind of protest, though, isn't it? Kind of person who gets a uniform for their protest, so they can, well, essentially have a moment with all the other people in the uniforms.
I wonder if the next year's edition will have black shorts.
Why?
Or black shirts.
Oh, right.
You know, wearing uniforms to a protest is a very curious thing, isn't it? Demonstrating that visual solidarity.
It is actually illegal in the UK, thanks to the black shirts,
Really?
mostly. So,
Wow.
yeah, there's a law in Britain, if you organise a protest and you're wearing a uniform, they don't decide, well, that's a crime, and they can disband the protest on that basis alone.
Very interesting. I'd like to see them do that to this lot, to be honest. We move forward to
Get out of here,
2018. This comes to Britain. The BBC is now reporting on it. How the Handmaid became an international protest symbol. And so we have more photos of these sort of somber-looking pro-choice activists, this time in Buenos Aires.
I'm very much reminded of the obsession with Harry Potter at this point. Just the, remember the book we all read. Yeah, has nothing to do with this.
But again, the issue they're campaigning about is abortion and abortion rights. So there seems to be a strong connection here. If we move forward again to 2018, The Guardian is talking about it. How the Handmaid's Tale dressed protests across the world. The red and white costume from Margaret Atwood's novel has been donned by women from Ireland to Argentina. And here's another load. Women dressed as handmaids protest against US Vice President Mike Pence in Philadelphia. Not against anything in particular, just against the
his
vice
existence.
President. Yeah.
Just eradicate Mike Pence, or we shall continue.
And of course, Mike Pence was famous for what was it? The Pence strategy, not being alone with another woman unless there was a third person present or something.
He was
like
incredibly faithful to his wife, and that was a problem. For some people, no one else.
But he instituted that policy so that he couldn't even be remotely accused of any kind of misconduct. And but he was also very Christian and very open about being Christian in America, which is still, believe it or not, a Christian country. This is obviously too much for these fellows here. And if we move forward to 2019, we again have Wired talking about it. Handmaid's Tale garb is the viral protest uniform of 2019. The imagery of the book and Hulu show has once again become increasingly relevant. And I feel like they've chosen the picture where she's rolling her eyes as much as I am at this point.
It's so cringe.
Yeah. Don't do this if you're going to protests. It's so cringy. Like, ugh. Now, how has this become so popular, do you think? Why do you think this has such appeal?
I think it's, again, like the Harry Potter signs. Like, people want to have a moment with people, especially women at protests. Sorry to down on women, but women do have this, where they want to apparently seem to put on uniforms like the pink pussy hats or anything else. It's leftist women I'm talking about.
Right.
Where they seem to want to have a big thing where they can be like, oh, yeah, I brought the thing, and look at me wearing the thing. And it's just like, no, this is cringe. Stop.
There is an element of making it about you, isn't there, in a way, when you wear these elaborate costumes to protests and things. But I think there's also a feeling that if you just go barehanded, then you're not doing enough. It's almost like you're a bit lazy. So the middle ground has traditionally been to bring a placard.
And a step further is what, terrorism? Like, I love the idea that's like, oh no, you only came up and said you don't like the bill. Like, yeah, it's kind of the point, protest as well. Like, what else are you expecting the person to do?
Yeah, but again, there's this culture. When you look at how protests are covered, there's a culture of trying to find the sign that's going to be eye-catching for the cameras or things like that, or the costume that's going to draw the attention to the protest. But I feel like that's also, it's playing into the narcissism of a lot of people involved in these movements of, yes, they think they're drawing attention to the protest, but psychologically what's going on, they're just trying to attract attention to themselves, which I think is something of a problem in modern society. So all of this stems from the adaptation of the novel The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. And you have her here. Would you buy a used car from this woman?
No, I haven't had much interaction with her, as I say, but I read that article she wrote previously, a couple of days ago or whatever. And she was just arguing that if it doesn't have a soul, you can kill it.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But so I was forced to read and study The Handmaid's Tale in school and pretend that it had any remote literary merit. And spoiler alert, it does not. It's a terrible book. And I'd be curious to see from chat in the comments whether you actually liked the book or whether you too were forced to study it and hated it or so on. So Margaret Atwood has created a successful literary career, in my opinion, out of putting the neuroses of the American Democratic Party into novel form. Their merit is entirely political and not literary. So it's little wonder for me that they were shoehorned into my curriculum for sixth formers to read and lionised by those who are eager to have the correct opinions about things. Atwood's novels are feminist activism first and coherent stories a very distant second. And just to underline that point, the first thing that she published was a collection of poetry called Power Politics, which was followed shortly by a novel, and then her second novel, I believe, was The Handmaid's Tale.
And then that's all she's done ever since.
No, she's written about 9 novels, but they circulate around these topics.
Novels.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a novelist and you keep writing novels, that's fine.
Yeah, sure.
Not criticising.
But the whole idea being that, as you say, putting the politics first.
Yes, absolutely. And there is a tendency which you can find in leftism for a lot of people to just kind of lose themselves in this sort of liminal fantasy between reality and fiction. And The Handmaid's Tale is precisely one of those unreal settings that they create, that they almost persuade themselves they're living in or heading towards. And I think these are actually terrible lodestones to guide where you're going politically. So I would like to contrast Atwood against another author who is beloved by the Democrats, which is Ursula Le Guin, author of A Wizard of Earthsea. Have you heard of this author?
Nope.
So she's also written The Left Hand of Darkness and The Dispossessed. Le Guin writes with a kind of political animus and is also a feminist, a civil rights-influenced author. But unlike Atwood, she can write. Her novels tend to be great stories first and challenging social critique second. I really loved A Wizard of Earthsea. I enjoyed The Left Hand of Darkness, though it is quite a challenging book in terms of the ideas. It's set in a world where it's an alien world where everyone is basically both sexes. So basically, you can tell where this is coming from. This is 1969 as well. So in this alien race, everyone is basically sexually neutral for something like 23 days out of 26. And then in the remaining 3 days, they can become either gender, either sex, mate, and then they revert to being neuter, which is a very interesting concept, and she actually explores it quite well. And she doesn't just present it as a modern author would, as, hey, look at this amazing free transsexual society, etc., etc. No, she actually explores, well, what actually would it be like? What would the social difficulties be? And so on and so forth. And she does a reasonably good job. I'm currently reading The Dispossessed, which is a bit more of a slog, but it's about an anarchist commune. It's exploring those. But again, she doesn't pull her punches. She lets the story tell itself without letting the politics rule the story. And so you can say, these are novels, they're not just nonsense. Speaking of nonsense, no, sorry. Another good writer with a political agenda is Philip Pullman, whose works and ideas about storytelling we've reviewed previously. Myself and Josh did this. We have a look at the thumbnail here. Do you remember this at all? The Northern Lights trilogy?
I didn't get to watch it. Let's
Right.
have a go around to it.
But yes, so Ursula Le Guin, Philip Pullman, I think are less likely to be read as first-rate literary authors than Atwood, who has mastered the art of the grift and been elevated to this special status where she's not just a genre writer or a sci-fi fantasy writer, she's an amazing, like, overpowering, brilliant, blah, 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 etc. Does my head in, honestly. Studying this was enough to put me off English literature for life. But if we move to the next one, this is The Handmaid's Tale, a futuristic dystopian novel by Margaret Atwood from 1985. It tells the story of a handmaid, a type of concubine or sex slave, whose role is to provide children for a small elite of patriarchs in the religious theocracy of Gilead. The characters, though, are largely irrelevant because what Atwood is really putting front and centre of this book is a dystopian vision of a hyper-religious society in which women are treated like chattel, to use the old phrase.
That's how she sees the old Puritan world.
Yes.
Yeah. I also that's the weird aspect of the uniform there, which is we're essentially sex slaves, which another weird thing to dress up as in a protest, especially when you're convincing yourself you live in that world, but you don't.
Well, in the era of OnlyFans, some people would, but yeah.
Protest against OnlyFans, dress up as the
Well, you
handmaids.
could
That
argue
might work.
you could argue that's what's going on a deep psychological level. It's kind of like, yes, they're self-awarely presenting themselves as downtrodden, but on this deep psychological level, perhaps there is this thing where it is a reaction against the hypersexualization of modern culture.
I guess we'll see the anti-OnlyFans protesters.
Look, I had to study The Handmaid's Tale in English literature. I can come up with BS explanations about literature on the fly. So, yeah, we'll see you in the comments. But yeah, these women do wear those restrictive bonnets, as you've seen. And the idea is they're supposed to impede the vision and so on and so forth. Funny story, when I was studying this, we had a Muslim girl in a hijab in the class. And while we were talking about this, it was quite a sensitive topic for the teacher who really wanted to sort of ask her, so what does it feel like to be constantly wearing a headgear? But she had to phrase it in a very delicate way, obviously, which is quite funny. Now, Atwood defends the laughable inconsistencies of the setting in her novel here by claiming that all of the dystopian elements are present in some real or historical religion. And that sounds, on the face of it, quite good. It's like, oh, you can't say this is unrealistic because it actually did happen in this religion at this point and so on. That sounds like a reasonable defense. But if you think about it for more than 2 minutes, you realize that this is like defending a dish that consists of snails, macarons, and frog's legs in a garlic gâteau by claiming that the ingredients are all French. They can all be found in French cuisine, so it's French. Well, no, it's not. It's a mess. Having authentic ingredients isn't enough to stop you from making a garbled mess. But of course, Atwood doesn't limit her criticisms to these dreadful novels, and I think we're going to get onto the article you've mentioned. She also writes opinions for The Guardian. Roe v. Wade, enforced childbirth is slavery. Margaret Atwood on the right to abortion. The US Supreme Court draft ruling on abortion is an assault on fundamental individual freedoms. She reflects on the issues at stake.
I mean, this is what I mean by why I never bothered reading it, because it's just when you come up with opinions like this, like, if I can't kill babies, I'm basically a slave. I mean, we are dealing with someone who is definitely cuckoo. I mean, he's not there in the world with anyone else.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go through her argument here. So she begins, nobody likes abortion, even when safe and legal. Stop you there. There are some people celebrating it. But let's be charitable and say that most people don't.
There are people on late night TV going, get an abortion, get one, and all the crowds cheering and clapping, and all the left is sharing that clip. So, no, there are people who like abortions. Mm-hmm.
But let's be charitable and let's say that that the majority or a significant proportion aren't going to be celebrating.
Let's pretend the left don't exist, okay?
No, I don't think the whole left are like that.
A significant portion these days.
Okay.
I mean, get that little effing sucker sucked out by the college professor. I'm sure you've seen the clip.
That's a nutter, yeah.
Yeah, but then everyone around her cheered. And those are average college people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She continues, it's not what any woman would choose for a happy time on Saturday night. Again, especially Saturday night comedy, apparently. But nobody likes women bleeding to death on the bathroom floor from illegal abortions either. What do you do? Now, come on. Can you get any more disingenuous a dichotomy here? Like, That's the choice. Either like abortions everywhere or bleeding to death on the bathroom floor.
But also, you're not going to convince any conservative with that argument. I mean, again, I'm not one way or the other on this. I'm still confused, let's say. But the conservatives who believe life begins at conception, if a woman goes out and tries to kill a baby and then dies from it, those people are not going to be convinced that that's bad.
Yeah.
They're going to be like, well, yeah, I mean, the murderer here got killed.
No, that's true. That's a very good point. I hadn't looked at it like that.
It also reminds me of the Argentinian abortion activist who died while having an abortion.
Yeah.
Don't know if you remember that story.
No.
It was like her fourth, and then, she died in the procedure. And, the Argentinian conservatives weren't too polite, to say the least.
I bet. Wow. But she continues very slipperily. Perhaps a different way of approaching the question would be to ask, what kind of country do you want to live in? One in which every individual is free to make decisions concerning his or her health and body? Or one in which half the population is free and the other half is enslaved? This is the classic slippery politician answer, and we can see this from a fiction which is far better than any Atwood has come up with. Yes, Minister, if we go to this clip.
This is how you deal with questions. If you have nothing to say nothing. Better still, have something to say and say it, no matter what they ask. Pay no attention to the question, just make your own statement. And then if they ask the question again, what you say is, that's not the question. Or, I think the real question is, and then you make another statement of your own.
Classic.
Love this, Minister, but it's also totally true.
Yes, absolutely. But it's what she's doing here as well. Now, that clip obviously is very well done in both writing and delivery. And that's one reason why Yes, Minister is essential viewing. Wish we'd studied that in English literature instead of the Handmaid's goddamn tale.
Also reflects reality.
So we continue. Instead of engaging with the question of abortion, she's changing the conversation into one about a different question, right? So a much more vague and abstract question in which there are no dead babies. Nothing to trouble the conscience of the enlightened thinker. The setup is actually quite obvious. If you allow abortion, then everyone is free, otherwise women are enslaved. Well, are you a slave owner? You there in the comments, I can see you there. Yeah, are you a slave owner? That's what she's saying.
Well.
But she continues, women who cannot make their own decisions about whether or not to have babies are enslaved because the state claims ownership of their bodies and the right to dictate the use to which their bodies must be put.
No. We dictate the right that you don't have the right to murder people, and that includes the baby. Like that's how that works.
Yeah.
I don't know why she's not able to get this.
But it's also like, okay, there are many decisions leading up to just being pregnant, right? And
no, it's not. You slip and fall.
Women do have control and agency over these actions. It's not the slip and fall, right?
No.
So do we really live in a society where women will only even think of the question of whether to have a baby or not after they're pregnant? Is that really the world we live in? Because I think I have a rather higher opinion of women than our feminist author here on that question. She continues, the only similar circumstance for men is conscription into an army. Yeah, I mean, obviously such a great literary mind is able to construct far more elaborate analogies than us poor mortals could hope for.
I mean, we were comparing it to murder because that's what it's described as. I mean, there's a human life you are ending, but it's the same as being conscripted. I don't get it.
Yeah. In both cases, there is risk to the individual's life, but an army conscript is at least provided with food, clothing, and lodging. Even criminals in prisons have a right to those things. If the state is mandating enforced childbirth, why should it not pay for prenatal care, for the birth itself, for postnatal care, and for babies who are not sold off to richer families for the cost of bringing up the child?
What?
I know. I don't know what fictional world she's thinking of here.
I mean, I can sort of see kind of an argument, but she's got so backwards. Like, if you get conscripted, you are made to kill things. That is your job. I mean, it's the exact opposite of what the mother is doing there, which is, well, making the thing live.
Yeah.
And raising it.
But Atwood, again, falls into the trap of thinking that the state is a person with a person's responsibilities here. And that's perfect for statists because they would just turn around and say, yes, no, the state will do all that. The state will pay. It will raise taxes to pay for it, and it will own all of you. Thanks, Margaret. And do you wonder now why she's so popular among the left?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, whereas anyone reasonable and normal would say, no, it's the parents.
Exactly.
That. Whereas for the conscription, well, you are being brought into the state there. So
no, she seems to only see women having children from the perspective of the state owning the children. The state doesn't own the children, doesn't purport to yet. She continues, and if the state is very fond of babies, why not honour the women who have the most babies by respecting them and lifting them out of poverty? That's assuming they're in poverty in the first place, of course.
Again, as if this is the Third Reich. Because I'm sure you know, like, they would give medals to mothers for
Yep,
having more kids
they
and
did.
loads of money and stuff. As if, like, the birthing of kids is just for the future of the empire.
The race.
Like, no, it's your decision. We live in a liberal society to have the kids. And if you have loads, again, that was your decision. It's not for the glory of the empire. Like,
If women are providing a needed service to the state, albeit against their wills, surely they should be paid for their labour.
by not killing you, I'm providing a service to the state, John. I deserve
amazing.
recognition.
Cheers, Mum. If the goal is more babies, I'm sure many women would oblige if properly recompensed. Otherwise, they are inclined to follow the natural law. Placental mammals will abort in the face of resource scarcity. I mean, citation needed. What?
But also comparing this to the West, basically North Koreans, so we must abort babies to eat.
Yeah, it's not like these women, these pregnant women, are being starved to death.
No.
That is not happening anyway. So this is just a grotesque mischaracterization. Atwood seems to think that babies belong to the state here rather than to mothers and fathers. She doesn't mention either word here. Entirely absent is any understanding of family or fathers, and she even avoids the word mother. Just what you want from a modern-day leftist author.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as Carl's new video, The Moral Root of Tragedy. And if you'd like to follow Carl, you can also see him on Getter at Carl Benjamin on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.